Hi, I'd like to introduce you to a client of mine who I gained a great deal of additional information from running Life Code hormone panel. And the reason being is as follows. So she's a 45-year-old perimenopausal woman, and she had been recommended to take HRT, but before she came to see me, but her symptoms of flushing, night sweats, raging anxiety, and incremental and continual weight gain was still prevailing, and she was pretty miserable. So we ran a nutrigenomic panel, and if we look, I'm just pulling out some of the areas that were really illuminating to really help me guide a more bespoke treatment plan for her, because we found that there were a number of common genetic variants that we call SNPs that were particularly working against her at this life stage. And the therapy that she'd been advised of, your perimenopausal, your menopausal, go on HRT, really didn't quite fit. So when we're looking at genetic panel or a nutrigenomic panel, we see numbers, a series of numbers and letters with coloured dots by the side of them. And what these series of numbers and letters represent are enzymes. The body uses enzymes to change a hormone, generally to be able to get rid of it. It's called metabolize it. And those enzymes are coded for by genes. So we can see whether somebody has got a vulnerability, if you like, for that gene / enzyme to work faster or slower, and whether it works efficiently or whether there is a slight area of vulnerability around that. So I've highlighted with the purple arrows 3 key elements that are quite pertinent for my client here. The first one on the right, you see I've got a purple arrow by these letters CYP1B1. What this means is that she has a vulnerability for estrogen, the natural estrogen that she's still making, being perimenopausal, but also remember HRT has a significant element of estradiol, estrogen, in it by its very nature. And these enzymes are all present in the liver. And so she has a preferential or a preference for estrogen to move towards what is called this pathway, which has the enzyme CYP1B1. There's a little up arrow, so she is genetically prone for any estrogen that she's taking, she makes internally, or that she takes endogenously through her HRT, to go down what's called the 4-OH pathway, and also the 16 on the left, because she's got an up arrow on the CYP3A4. You don't need to worry about the numbers, but you just look at the arrows. And this basically means that the estrogen that moves on to the next stage is much more prolific. It's more aggressive. It's more antagonistic. Now, we combine that with the fact that we've got 2 arrows pointing in both directions on these letters COMT, COMT. This is the enzyme and the gene that takes that estrogen that's kind of gone down the much more antagonistic, a more proliferative pathway, and should make it completely water soluble so that we can actually pee it out and get rid of it. But this, you can see, has got 2 red dots, which means it's homozygous, which means that it's a super slow pathway. It's really sluggish. So that sort of more prolific estrogen kind of gets stuck. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't get rid of it or she doesn't get rid of it. It's just much, much slower. So it hangs around for a lot longer. And there isn't anything to counterbalance. There isn't very much progesterone around at this life stage to counterbalance that more proliferative estrogen pool. Okay. Now, the triple whammy with this particular client is, and the third purple arrow, is that she has a down regulation on her ESR1. This is a particular type of estrogen receptor that means that this particular variant that she has means that her negative feedback loop to the brain, which all of our hormones communicate back to, specifically the hypothalamus, that negative feedback loop is less sensitive. So it's like it's lazy. It's a bit like insulin sensitivity, that it's not actually picking up the message as effectively, that there's too much estrogen in the pool and it should be sort of dialing down the response to that. And that ESR is around that. That is called a negative feedback loop. So that's a very interesting picture in a perimenopausal woman where naturally, certainly at 45, her natural estrogen levels will still be quite high but erratic. And now we're adding in HRT with a component of estrogen, and that very potentially with this genetic makeup could be aggravating the situation. And that is sort of confirmed by some other results that we can get from the hormone panel, where we're looking at how she metabolizes histamine. Or in her case, she doesn't very well. So there's a relationship with histamine and estrogen. The more estrogen that we have, either taking it in exogenously or the estrogen pool internally, there is that estrogen causes mast cells to degranulate. They cause mast cells to release their contents. So our histamine pool becomes a bit greater. Estrogen also downregulates the enzyme, which is on this slide here, DAO, diamine oxidase. It causes the downregulation, a lesser expression of that enzyme. So we've got now quite a potential histaminergic picture. And a lot of too much histamine can cause anxiety. It can cause problems with sleep. And this is quite an issue with this client. So we can see she's not only because she's got more of an estrogen pool, we're getting more histamine anyway, but she has two genetic variants on both the DAO gene and the HNMT, which means that being able to break down that histamine is even slower. Also, she has a slight variant on the ALDH gene, which is involved in getting rid of making alcohol water soluble and getting rid of that. And she does complain of not even being able to tolerate a glass of wine anymore with her girlfriends. Poor love. So this really fits her picture. And then there was one final component in that she has we can also look at a number of genes on the Life Code hormones panel that code for sensitivity to insulin. And this is something that happens to women as we go through perimenopause and menopause. Our insulin sensitivity becomes naturally poorer. She doesn't have an issue with that, but she does have a slight variant on the melatonin gene. And melatonin and insulin have they dance together anyway. So she has a slight upregulation on the melatonin enzyme gene, but that has an impact on suppressing her insulin sensitivity. It's a very interesting bidirectional role. But as a result, causing her blood sugar regulation process to become slightly wobbly. So all of these clinical considerations for this particular client can be supported and manipulated by a now much more individually targeted diet, lifestyle, and nutritional supplementation plan to improve her results. We have to remember that our health destiny is not determined by our genes alone, but it's a combination of our genes, their areas of vulnerabilities that we've seen with this client, and the environmental factors that changes the way that they're expressed, which determines the health outcomes. So hopefully now we can see that while body identical HRT is a wonderful option for women, it's not the magic bullet or indeed the holy grail. And like this medication, it can only work to the level of the health of the overall environment into which it's placed. So with this greater knowledge of your genetic vulnerability, together with optimizing every element of your physical and emotional environment, an infinitely more intuitive treatment plan can be created. And that's what I did with this client.